Chapter 2, Sonnet of Mingsong. So this guy brings me to his house to meet his sister, and it's this little modest house on the north side of town, but we still didn't see anybody else on the way. We go inside, and the man immediately brings me out to their backyard, where we meet his sister, seemingly playing with a flock of chickens and her chicks. She was a short Chinese woman with shiny chestnut brown hair tied in a braid that hung to her waist, and had bright blue eyes that sparkled like starlight. She was wearing a stylish red long-sleeve blouse and a tight black skirt that really showed off her curves. I couldn't help but picture her. Now, this right here is the first break. We've got a break here, and then it goes, "Uncle Damon, you promised," in a different font, because it's supposed to be Vidal talking to her uncle. So he goes, "I couldn't help but picture her. Uncle Damon, you promised." Right. Anyway, we walked up to her, and her brother said, "Hey, Jew, it's good to see you again. Your letter confused me, but I came as quick as I could. Oh, right, this is... Wait, I forgot to ask you your name. I'm so sorry. Please forgive my rudeness," he begged. "It's all right. We did meet in a surprising way. I'm Damon of Athens." "It's nice to meet you, Damon of Athens. I'm Ching Zhao, and this is my sister, Ju. Ju, this is Damon. He seems to want to know more about what's going on in town," Zhao explained for me. "I think we'd all like to know. General Lai had his men come round up most of the able-bodied around here and forcibly drafted them into the military. Then he marched them off into the forest to the northeast," Ju said. "The forest? But the only thing of interest near that forest is Mount Huaguo. I've heard the Mingsong family controls everything in this province. Why would they bring so many forces there?" Zhao asked the room. "Mount Huaguo? That's where Nuwa said I would find Sun Wukong if he was at home," I said to myself. It seemed to pique their interest, but they both only seemed more confused. There were a few moments of uncomfortable silence before Ju spoke up, saying, "Even if Sun Wukong is there, why pull everyone from our town to fight a bunch of monkeys?" "I have no idea," Zhao said with disappointment and a shake of his head. "Well, I guess there's only one way to find out. You said the forest is to the northeast?" I asked Ju, pointing with my thumb. She nodded. I nodded in reply before turning and heading toward the fence. "Wait, let me come with you," Zhao begged as he ran up to me. I told him it probably won't be a very safe place. I don't want to see you get hurt. But he insisted, saying, "I can handle myself. You'll see." I rolled my eyes, sighed, and continued to the northeast without a word. He seemed to take my silence as an invitation and walked by my side. We climbed the hill surrounding the town before cresting it and heading back down. But on our way we managed to spot some tracks in the mud that seemed to belong to a large cart. I went and checked them out while we followed them down to the forest below. "This seems like a surprisingly large cart to be wheeling out into a forest. You would think it would get stuck out in the trees and roughage," I said. Zhao nodded, but I was surprised when he pointed ahead. "Look! It looks like the bushes have been cut down," he said, running ahead on the path of the tracks. I followed closely and immediately saw the small stumps of bushes left behind. Their trunks and foliage had been simply tossed aside just out of the way, but I was annoyed when I saw the tracks continued deeper. The army had cut their way through the underbrush, wiping out every plant in their path to make way for their oversized cart. I growled, "Treating the forest like this is stupid and careless." Zhao only nodded in agreement. We walked for what felt like 4 hours before finally starting to hear some noise other than the quiet song of nature. As we crested a small incline leading down, we finally spotted the large cart. It had 8 men in front of it. They were guarding the pair of horses drawing it, and there were a handful trailing behind. The cart was large and covered by a tarp, but something inside it was flailing so wildly the entire thing rocked on its axles. I was curious, but Zhao grabbed my arm and pulled me from the cart's path. All the men stared at me as they passed by with the cart, and I glared back, but I still wasn't sure what to make of it. I said, "Those men didn't seem to have a leader with them, and there were so few. There must still be a frontier camp somewhere." "That would make sense. If I were a gambling man, I'd wager either Mingsong Liu or Lin Yu are in charge of this operation." "I wonder if they'll let us speak with them," Zhao pondered. "You don't need anyone to let you speak with them. Just speak," I said, heading back onto the tracks and following them deeper. "Try doing that with General Lai and they'll take off your head," Zhao said with a gulp. "Not if you have something important to say," I retorted. Zhao seemed surprised and couldn't tell if he agreed. We walked in silence a few minutes before finally seeing a very large group of soldiers in the same blue armor as those guiding their cart. They were surrounding a large man and a larger woman, the two of whom were seemingly just talking with each other. The man was a tall, bulky, and stocky Chinese man with a clean-shaven face and black curly hair. He was wearing the pants of the armor the men were wearing, but like me, it seemed he'd elected to go without a shirt. He had hardened green eyes and wore a light blue armband on his right arm that bore the Mingsong family insignia. He had a large glaive slung over his back and looked pleased. The woman he was speaking with was even taller than I am now, but back then she towered over me. She was nearly 4 heads taller, and I wasn't exactly short when I was a young man. She had long, dark blue hair that hung down to her waist, brilliant purple eyes, and a scar that ran from the cheekbone on the right side of her face to just under her left eye. She was wearing a short, sleeveless, light gray robe-like dress with a thin black cloth that hung to her knees and kept her dress tight over her waist of the armored blue leggings underneath. She also had a long cloak-like shawl and a checkerboard pattern of light blue and white, with wide sleeves that hung to her elbows. And a long decorative sword hung from bulky hips so wide that she looked like she could crush a man's skull between her thighs. Really, Uncle Damon? What? How can you expect me not to point that out? Yeah, roll your eyes. Anyway, the most interesting part about her by far was that she was surrounded by a shining golden light. If you're familiar with the aura transformations of the gods, these aren't the same thing. Our auras are usually thin, precise layers of shining energy surrounding our bodies, allowing us to store and emit even more power. But hers was different. It didn't surround her entire body. It seemed like it was coming from her stomach or midriff, and its intensity seemed like it was constantly changing based around her mood. Even as we approached, the light was shining more dimly by the second, but it never faded. The light of her body illuminated the entire clearing, and made her and the other Mingsong she spoke with stand out in the crowd, the latter of whom cast gloomy shadows through the trees. I turned to Zhao and gave him a signal to remain quiet so I could listen as we moved closer, and he nodded in agreement. The man was speaking as we approached. "That's right. You've done a great job, Lin Yu. Why don't you head home for a rest for now? I'll stay here and finish our gathering operation," he said. She smiled down at him. "Thank you, Liu. I'm surprised Oxhead proved so easy to capture, but nonetheless, Father will be pleased. Are you sure you'll be all right if I... Who are you? State your business," Lin Yu demanded as she heard our footsteps and turned in our direction. Zhao froze, but I kept walking closer. "I'm Damon of Athens. Why have you taken all the able-bodied from Dongfu?" I answered. "We're on General Mingsong's orders, kid," Liu shouted. He was about to say more, but his sister stepped forward and signaled for him to stand down. "We're here gathering loofah sponge in monkshood. What business do you have asking our duties?" "Liar!" Zhao shouted behind me, surprising me greatly. "You might be gathering those plants, but that isn't your real objective. Tell us what's really going on here." Mingsong Liu turned to his men as his sister smirked before responding. "Execute them," was his command. Just as Lin Yu turned back to insist that they stop, they fired a legion of crossbows as the order to yield left her lips. I slammed hard into Zhao to knock him over as I drew my blade and managed to slash all the bolts that endangered me from the air in 3 strokes. Or, well, I thought I had anyway, but I did get hit in the left shoulder. Luckily, it seems my body was durable enough that the impact of the piercing bolt wasn't forceful enough to enter my skin, and it bounced right off. "Did you see that, Lin Yu?" "I did." "Stand down, men. You said your name was Damon, right?" she asked with a smile. "You won't forget it," I said with excitement. Zhao was starting to get up, so I said, "Stay down!" out the side of my mouth. He took my advice with a thumbs up before crawling behind a tree. "It's nice to meet you. I'm Mingsong Lin Yu, and this is my brother, Liu. Your friend is correct that we're gathering more than those ingredients, but I'd like to know how he knows our business," she said. As her glare turned to a stare, her shining light grew brighter and suddenly something changed. Divines assert an outward pressure on the atmosphere once they reach a certain level of strength, but this mortal woman, she was growing more interesting by the second. Suddenly I felt a downward pressure, like the sky itself was pressing down on me, trying to force me to my knees. Zhao popped his head out from behind the tree, and as her eyes left me, I felt the pressure leave me as well. He pointed to his starlight eyes and called out, "I have eyes that can see the truth! You can't lie or hide anything from me." Lin Yu and Liu looked to each other, seeming they hadn't expected that. After only a moment, Lin Yu turned to her men and pointed to Zhao. "Capture him! Right now!" she ordered. I put myself between them and pointed my sword at the men as they rushed us. "Any who approach are welcoming their death!" I shouted in fair warning. The men froze in place, but many of them had been reloading as they charged. They fired a volley of bolts at me, and I deflected most of them, but this time I was still hit by several. I froze when I heard Zhao cry out in agony behind me. I looked back and my heart began to sink as I saw him standing near the tree, doubled over and holding both hands over his left eye. I could see the bolt sticking out from between his fingers where it had struck his eye socket. I turned back to face our enemies as I heard a set of footsteps approaching. My heart started to race as I felt Lin Yu's unusual pressure once again pressing down on me. I took a defensive stance as she drew her blade and her light grew bright with intensity. "If you're challenging anyone here to a death match, my code of honor compels me to accept," she said smugly before throwing a signal to her men to stand down. I gulped as I built up as much strength as I could muster, but I have to admit I was intimidated. My master had trained me to fight opponents far more powerful than myself, and yet for some reason, this mortal woman was scaring the life out of me. I gritted my teeth and prepared myself for the worst as she stopped and flourished her exceptionally long black blade. I was a little surprised when she beckoned me to attack. She seemed entirely off guard, simply holding her long blade off to the side. I decided to try and use the element of surprise and lunged at her as fast as I could, but I was shocked when she perfectly parried my blow at the last second. I dropped into a sweep kick in front of her, but she merely hopped over it before landing right on top of me, pressing her foot down into my throat. I gagged as I started to struggle, but she pointed her blade at my neck. "You move from your place and I'll kill you like the dog that you are." I growled and used my elemental power to call a bolt of lightning down from the sky. It crashed through the tree canopy and was supposed to electrify us both, but I couldn't believe she got out of the way in time. A wild but intrigued look in her eyes. I got up and rubbed my throat before flourishing my blade and electrifying. "You might think you've got the upper hand, but don't you ever count me out until the fight is over," I shouted. She smiled and beckoned me to attack again. I smiled back and shook my head. She shrugged and rushed me. She was so fast it was like she disappeared and then reappeared in front of me. I barely managed to deflect her first slash, but as she spun into an even harder one, I was absolutely aghast when her sword snapped mine in two, slashing me across the face in the process. I went spinning into the dirt, but managed to right myself and start getting up quickly. She seemed entirely unsurprised and pointed her blade at my throat as I got up. "This battle was over before it began. Any last words, Damon of Athens?" "Get the hell out of here, Zhao!" I screamed, desperate to protect him from the Mingsong family. I didn't look away from Lin Yu, but I heard him gasp before running off in exasperation. Mingsong Liu threw a hand forward and shouted, "Fire!" before a volley of bolts left the men's crossbows once again. I put myself between the bolts and Zhao as much as I could, but I turned back and looked as I heard Zhao cry out again. He'd been struck in the knee this time, making him fall into the dirt with a groan of agony. "Damn it," I said to myself, looking back to Lin Yu as the broken sword shook in my grasp. She looked extremely satisfied, smiling smugly down at me as her purple eyes pierced my soul. It reminded me of someone. I couldn't help but back away as she started approaching, but she vanished. My eyes darted in every direction as I scanned the environment for her, but I froze when I felt her breath on my neck. I leaped forward to try and escape her attack, but I underestimated the length of her blade. If I hadn't ducked my head, she would have taken it off. Instead, she slashed me badly across the front and side of my head, cutting off a ton of my hair and getting blood in my eyes. "I hope you've made your peace," Lin Yu said, surprising me when she sounded a little sad. I was on the ground with my back to a tree as I desperately tried to wipe the blood from my eyes when I felt the tip of her blade touch my throat. But everyone froze when we all heard something strange approaching.